I have not made a video in a long time. I've been busy, so I'm making a video series about so much. I'm making a quick video series about narrative theory. We're going to be talking about how we make movies, how movies are made, and oh my god. Because you know what makes me really mad when I'm watching a movie? Whenever a character says something that makes no sense. And not necessarily something incomprehensible, but something that doesn't make any sense, like, logically. You know what I mean, right? Haven't you ever been watching a movie and you see a character say something and you just go, well, why did they just say that? Generally speaking, movies are made of these little tiny pieces that make a whole plot. And these pieces are called plot elements. You probably already knew that. When you put these plot elements together, it forms a whole story. And it's really important that your audience understands what your story is. So you have to make sure these plot elements are clear. And one of the easiest ways to do that is using dialogue, which, you know, is when two characters just talk to one another. Now, this definitely gets the job done, but it can take you out of the realism of the movie. And I'm not saying that I have a problem with dialogue, but sometimes expressing an element using dialogue just sounds stupid. And I find just detracts from the overall quality of the movie. Like, have you ever seen a scene like, hey man, how's it going? Not all too great, you know, with my dad in the hospital and everything. He has cancer, you know. Of course I know. He's my dad too. After all, we are twins. That is why we look so alike. Now, I know that I'm exaggerating, but you know what I'm talking about, right? Like, these characters don't sound human. Why would they be talking to each other like that if they're brothers? They probably are aware of the situation. If they were brothers, they would obviously know that they were twins, unless that was like the plot element. I don't know. But point is, this is not something that makes a whole lot of sense why the dialogue is there. Chances are, though, unless your film starts at the beginning of time, your characters have existed for some time prior to the film actually starting. It's very likely that at some point your film's going to have some amount of exposition in it, and how you do it is critical. You could just do it with dialogue because it's easy, but it detracts from the film so much. Just look at the "my dad is in the hospital" thing. It seems totally forced, the dialogue feels fake, and because of that, we as the audience are pulled out of the world of the movie, which is something that we would want to avoid if we were the filmmaker. But it's not impossible to do this without using dialogue, or at least in a realistic way. So let's take a look at some techniques used for exposition in film, ones that don't necessarily abuse the power of dialogue. Many times filmmakers want to be extremely clear about what's happening, so there's really two easy ways you can do this. The first is through voiceover narration, and the second is through just straight up showing the audience what you want to show them. For instance, consider the film Inside Out, which does both of these in the first 10 minutes.
These are Riley's memories, and they're mostly happy, you'll notice, not to brag. But the really important ones are over here. I don't want to get too technical, but these are called core memories.
Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with doing something like this. It could be done in a more clever way, but it doesn't really feel like you're being taken out of the reality of the movie. After all, what they're explaining is being explained to you, not to anybody else there. Joy talking to the audience directly is totally fine, and we get some funny jokes out of it. And not to mention that this is a pretty unrealistic universe, so there's gonna need to be a lot of explanation done. It's not exactly something that we're familiar with, or a world that we totally understand just by watching it. Okay, so sorry if it seems like I'm looking exclusively at kids' movies, but let's take a look at Wreck-It Ralph. If you haven't seen this movie, there's this whole terminology that all the characters in the video game universe use that doesn't exactly make sense to us. And one of the terms that we hear a lot is the phrase going turbo. And all that we know up until a certain point is that it means something bad.
Ralph's gone turbo?
The first time, however, that we as the audience learn what it means is when Felix is explaining it to Sergeant Calhoun.
So what is it with this Wreck-It Joker, huh? Why'd he go AWOL?
I wish I knew, ma'am. He was acting all squirrely last night, going on about cake and medals, but I never thought he'd go turbo.
Go turbo?
That's right. You guys just got plugged in. Well, Back when the arcade first opened, Turbo Time was by far the most popular game.
Now, Sergeant Calhoun is new to this world, so she doesn't necessarily understand the terminology either. So because of that, when Felix is explaining it for the first time, it's a really clever tool, because even though the real purpose of explaining what going turbo means is to explain it to the audience, in the world of the film, Felix is actually just explaining it to Sergeant Calhoun, which makes sense. My point here is that you can use dialogue as a means of exposition, but you do just have to figure out a way to get it in without being unrealistic. If the only purpose of your dialogue is to explain something to the audience, chances are you're doing something wrong. So, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of films have to directly explain the rules of the world to the audience. After all, the world the movie takes place in may be very different from our own, and so because of that, it may be beyond our understanding. Opening titles are really awesome, and I was actually tempted to make a whole video just on them, but I'm not. So let's take a look at one of my favorite films that uses opening titles, Alien. So Alien starts out after a lengthy title sequence. We see a small blurb of text that looks like this. And it doesn't seem like it's giving us a whole lot of information, but the information shown here is invaluable to the film and to the film's quality. This small little bit of text tells us so much about the setting that it doesn't have to be explained through dialogue. Because let's be honest, we'd have some questions if these titles weren't there. The first one being, why are they on a spaceship? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. If people are on a spaceship, they kind of need a reason to be there. It goes deeper than that. You see, there's this thing in film studies called the diegesis, which you might know about, you might not. The diegesis basically refers to anything that exists within the world of the story. For example, in Alien, Ripley is part of the diegesis. She is something that exists within the world of the story. However, things like voiceover narration, music, cuts, those things are called non-diegetic. Now in this case, the text that's describing the Nostromo does not actually exist within the realm of the movie. You know, the text isn't actually floating through space, we just are imagining that it is. But at this point, we haven't really seen anything that's really part of the diegesis. So before we've actually become immersed inside the reality of this movie, we've accepted something that's not in the reality to help ease us in. And because of that, none of the characters in Alien ever have to explain anything. Can you just imagine if Dallas said something like, oh yeah, we're towing these 200 million tons of ore back to Earth. We gotta do it. Like, I don't know how that dialogue could have happened. I don't know how they could have done it. My point is, opening titles are awesome. And if you need to explain something, you can use opening titles. I mean, they're pretty forgiving. A lot of these films have really awesome scenes of exposition that kind of wouldn't fit into any of the categories that I've just listed. Many films have these incredible ways to introduce us to the characters or the world. And I just want you to pay attention and see when those appear. Think about The Lord of the Rings and its awesome intro, or The Matrix and the scenes where Neo is learning about the Matrix, or in The Truman Show where we see a documentary about the Truman Show. Not to mention all the scenes where things are just kind of implied. I mean, look at The Breakfast Club. There's this lengthy opening sequence in which all of these characters are introduced. I mean, there's a lot being told here that's not just being explicitly said.
I know school is going to give a scholarship to discipline case.
All of these examples that I've given were much better than, obviously we have the same dad, we are brothers. Don't you think? So appreciate filmmakers who are clever with exposition. But if you're a filmmaker yourself, make sure that your lines don't exist just to educate the audience. And think about a clever way to introduce your character or to introduce your world. That's going to do it for this part, but stay tuned, because part 2 is coming along. And we're going to talk about not exposition, but narrative. And I'm going to record part 2, so it's on the way, I promise. And stay tuned, it'll be coming out soon, and I'm going to be talking about narrative next time, you know, talking about the present. Did the past, next we're doing the present. So stay tuned, keep your eye out, and this whatever stuff. I'm gonna put some stuff here maybe. If there's stuff there. Figure out how to do it. That's some cool stuff. I recommend checking it out. Bye.